Hines is proud to partner The Urbanist on Monocle Radio. Hines is a leading global real estate investment manager. Hines owns and operates $93 billion of assets across property types and on behalf of a diverse group of institutional and private wealth clients. Hines' ambition? Well, in the words of its chairman and CEO, Jeffrey Hines, to be the best real estate investor, manager and partner in the world. Find out how Hines is making that dream a reality. Head to hines.com now. Hines, a leader in real estate investing and management since 1957. Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up.
We know that we could be stronger together. We know that by breaking down those barriers and sort of pooling our resource and our ideas and working hand in hand with our communities could tell a very different story.
We visit 3 developments in the UK capital this week to see what's new in London. From the vast industrial frames dotted around the urban landscape that are getting a long-awaited facelift, to a new public space connecting a busy business district to its ecological environment. And a look at the blockbuster new tenants taking up residence next to Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. That's all ahead in the next 30 minutes here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. We start today with some significant features of the London skyline that are due a revamp. My first guest is Simon Lewis, the Planning and Development Director at St James and St William, which sits within the Berkeley Group, one of the biggest developers in London and the UK. St James and St William has been charged with restoring and developing London's gas holders, the enormous old industrial frame structures that are now mostly unused, but many of which are listed as protected pieces of historical architecture. Simon, thank you so much for joining me. Now, let's start with the background of these gas holders. Tell us the history of how they came to be.
Gas holders sort of arrived on our city landscapes from the end of the Industrial Revolution, sort of the 1830s. And then I think by 1900, there was somewhere between 13,000 and 17,000 of these things in the UK. By 1990, that had come down to about 500. And that's predominantly due to the sort of changes in how we deal with gas. I mean, when they were first introduced, it was just the power street lighting, and then it went on for commercial and domestic uses. And then North Sea gas came in. Another technological improvements meant that these great storage facilities were no longer required. And also a number of the gasworks sites produce gas as well as stored gas back in the day. And again, that was no longer a function that was required of these sites. So over time, they were decommissioned. And in London in 1990, there were probably about 70 or 80 gas holders, whereas now there are probably around 20.
Along comes your company and you buy up all the land that still has these gas holders on then?
Yeah, so National Grid have an extensive portfolio of sites across the country, and our interest in gasworks site came from Southall Gasworks and also Battersea Gasworks. So we'd entered in, I suppose, separate individual land transactions with National Grid on those 2 sites. But through that relationship, it opened up the opportunity to look at a more extensive portfolio. And so in 2014, that joint venture was sort of solidified, and it gave us the opportunity to review the National Grid portfolio and to take on some of these redundant gasworks sites. And they represent a huge brownfield opportunity to deliver new sustainable places within London.
What's the deal then as you go onto these sites? We're going to come to a particular site in a moment. You go on site and there is one of these, the remains or an existing gas holder, and they're vast. So is always the deal, okay, we now recognise this as industrial heritage. Are these sites listed? Or do you sometimes go in and say, it'd be much easier if we just knock this thing down? What's the decision making?
So it depends. So sometimes we inherited the sites where the gas holders had already been removed by National Grid as part of an early clean-up operation and to prepare the sites for redevelopment. On other sites where they are heritage assets, so that could either be that they're listed or, in the case of our development at Bethnal Green, Regent's View, they sit within a conservation area. So they're protected structures, so you can't just take those down. And so on those sites, you get the gasworks site and you get the gas holders. And actually, Bromley by Bow, which is a site that I've been working on for the last 4 years, we've got 7 listed gas holders on that site, which is quite a challenge.
So we want to look at a particular project that you've been doing down here in Fulham.
Yes. And
I went online to look at the site. It's always amazing for me when you live in London and you think of this rammed-in city. There are actually plots that are acres large that have absolutely nothing on them. And here's one of them. It's a big site.
I think this is the fantastic opportunity that the gasworks sites present, because they do sit sort of cheek by jowl by existing communities, but they've been cut away or carved out from those communities for sort of 150, 160 years, which is the case in Fulham. And so one of the objectives that we had when we were looking at these gasworks sites is that how do you sort of restitch these sites back in? And because of the scale of these sites, I mean, Fulham, Kingsroad Park will have this big park in the centre of it, so that also helps sort of drive people in. And the centrepiece being, it has the oldest remaining gas holder in the world, gas holder number 2, which dates back to, I think, the late 1830s.
And tell me, you're a planner by training. You're working for the biggest developer in London. I'm struck by what a selling point they are. Because when I look at all the literature, it's like, will contain the gas holder. The gas holder is here. Yeah. Cut to 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the idea that somebody would want to be next to an old factory would be hell. And then suddenly we learned to live in industrial spaces, the loft living thing took off. And now our relationship with this heritage is entirely different.
That's very true. These sites were used for gas production, and it would have been the last place on earth that you'd want to live when they were fully operational. Now, it's almost like an oven-ready placemaking piece. They create a place for themselves. And I think one of the things that we've picked up from customers is that they want to live in places with character and integrity. And clearly, industrial heritage provides that. And it's very difficult to sort of replicate that type of character within a new development. So having these heritage assets on the site that we can refurbish and incorporate into the development is incredibly important for customers and people to feel that they live in a place with character.
And tell me, at Fulham and other places where you've worked at so many of these sites, obviously, what do you actually do with them? Because I guess there's two things. There's I'm going to use all the wrong words here, the cylinder or the balloon element that was in the middle of it used to go up and down with the gas in it. And then they have these mighty metal frames around the edge. Sometimes I know that people just keep the steel frame and they try and build within it. Sometimes they leave it more alone. What's some of the uses you've done with them?
It was interesting because when we sort of inherited these sites, I don't think we really knew what we got ourselves into. The triplets at King's Cross was probably the most visible example of how you can repurpose these structures to fit in with new development. I think 2 of the triplets there have residential buildings within them. But these gas holder structures, what you see is the gas holder frame. But below the surface is this also very ornate structure, which is this sort of truss structure that supports the top of the gas holder. And that in itself is a beautiful piece of sort of engineering. Back in the day, it was not only functional, but it was also beautiful. So at Bromley by Bow, one of the things we're doing there is to try and showcase the below ground structure. So we're bringing that out of the ground, moving it to where a former gas holder would have been, and actually showing what this truss structure is. And it will become a place where you can have community events. And then the other ones, the actual frames, we've found a way that you can just build inside them now. So you keep the frame itself and you put residential buildings within them. We're doing that at our Regent's View development up in Bethnal and also at Bromley by Bow, where we're building in 7 of the gas holders.
Now, when you get these structures, I presume if it's been there since the 1830s or even since the late 19th century, it's not just a case of like painting them. I presume that you're kind of almost rebuilding some of them. Have you relearned, as it were, all the skills of the trade of making them in the first place?
Yeah, it's a very, very challenging and complex sort of refurbishment project and very expensive. There are limited specialists who can take this on in this country. We've been working with the people that have done King's Cross. And actually, it really depends on the nature of the structure, how much it's been sort of weathered and deteriorated. But You have to prove everything via Historic England. So there's a lot of information that we need to prepare in advance before we can get agreement to do the refurbishment. We have to do a lot of detailed surveys, both above and below ground. And then once we've agreed that, we have to then decide whether you can actually refurbish in situ on site or whether you actually have to take the structure down, refurbished off site and then brought back. To give you an example of, so with Bromley by Bow, the structures there have to be taken down, dismantled. That takes 6 months for each of the structures to come down. They then go off site to be refurbished. They're sort of sandblasted to sort of understand the extent of the deterioration and how much refurbishment you need to do. I mean, the refurbishment is not to get it back to it being a brand new gas holder. It still has its warts and all feel about it, but it's structurally sound. And then it takes another 6 months to bolt it all back together. But every step of the way, you've got to agree with Historic England, get that signed off, and then you can move to the next stage.
Simon, you brought in a book with you in your tote bag, Gas Holders, A History in Pictures. You said this is the holy grail for people who are interested in gas holders. Yeah. You obviously love these things. What is it about a gas holder that you look at and you think, oh, this is amazing?
I remember when I inherited Bromley by Bow and it had the 7 gas holders on there, and I was like, what have I done? Why have I got this project? And then when you start to really understand the history of the site and you see what this means to people, actually, I think there's a responsibility about trying to retain these types of assets. Okay, you can't retain them all, but it was a really important part of our history, the end of the Industrial Revolution and what these gas holders, they were excellent examples of our ingenuity and engineering skills. I mean, they are phenomenal.
And as you said, whenever these projects come up, the local community reaction is always, oh, you better not be touching the gas holder, because they are icons of the skyline for these people.
They are. And actually, it's interesting because when we've been speaking to Historic England, they were looking at or trying to understand the social value associated with heritage assets and how does that impact on people's health and well-being. We've opened up the sites to invite communities on there. And at Bromley by Bow, we've had a whole range of local people come on and tell the stories about, they remember this about the gas holder or this about the gas works. We've had apprentices who were there in the late 70s. The stories that you hear, it helps you to relate to these physical structures. So they are incredibly important to the communities where they are.
This is a great case study in a way, isn't it, about the things we should be thinking before we dismantle and take things off site, about how we reuse and repurpose and rethink the assets we have as they are in our cities.
Yeah, I think it's not for the faint-hearted. It's obviously right, we should be bringing forward brownfield sites. I heard someone say the other day that there are no easy brownfield sites left in London, which is why you now find the ones with gas holders on them. But it's really, really important that we're not put off by that opportunity and that we can work through this. And I think one of the things that we've been working through with Historic England is that there's potentially a blueprint here about how you can take forward complex, challenging sites and get a successful outcome and retain the heritage assets and deliver all the other benefits that these large developments do. So I think we've learned a lot through that process. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with Bromley by Bow. I mean, it really is quite a special development and probably my sort of crowning achievement, I think, within Berkeley. And I can't wait to go back and see, when that comes forward, because it represents something that's pretty unique. There isn't another place in the world with 7 Victorian gas holders.
Simon Lewis, thank you so much for joining me on The Urbanist. We travel now to the Canada Water neighbourhood, where development has been taking place to turn one of the city's busy business districts into a more people-friendly place to be. Eden Dock is a new public space designed by Howells with landscape design by HTA Design, and it was opened at the end of 2024. Glenn Howells, the director and founder of Howells, told us more about this new waterfront oasis in central London.
Canary Wharf's evolving. Many people might think that it's finished and it was completed as a business district, but actually 36 years ago was when it was started, and it started out life as a financial hub. But we've been working with Canary Wharf Group on a visionary strategy which takes it all the way through for the next 15 years. And the idea is to turn it into a world-class district. So it's been on a journey for the last 10 or so years, moving away from being a business-focused district into becoming a true neighbourhood, a great neighbourhood. So it's enriching and diversifying its uses. Part of that journey is also looking to reimagine the outside spaces, so not just the buildings themselves, but also looking to transform the spaces in between buildings. And the central dock, what used to be called Middle Dock, is the one right outside of the Jubilee Station. And as you emerge out the Jubilee Station, you see this piece of water in front of you. And so the idea there is to turn this into a green-blue spine, including Jubilee Gardens and extending west out towards the Thames. And it became known as Eden Dock because Canary Wharf Group formed a partnership back in 2022 with a vision to create a blueprint for sustainable green and blue heart for the middle of the Canary Wharf estate. And what that involved was enriching it, creating structures within it. But perhaps the most notable sort of difference that you see when you experience it is it's totally greened. So there are now floating structures which have got greenery and trees and a wide variety of species, animals and ducks on the water, but also it's been transformed for the amount of greenery and vegetation that's been added. I think the biggest difference that you see if you visited Canary Wharf before Eden Dock arrived was that the space outside the Jubilee Station now extends over the water. And a really important part of that is that the current level of most of the pedestrian spaces is about 6 metres above the old historic level of the docks, and that was the way it was built because of structures and car parking structures. This is the first location where the public space cascades and steps down to the water, and so people now can drop down and walk within a few centimetres of the water and experience it in a completely different way. And as they do that, they also engage with the greenery and the nature that's also been introduced through these floating structures. We work closely with the sustainability consultant Greengage, and they provided evidence-backed strategy of how we increase the biodiversity. So there's been a 55% increase in the ecological value of Eden Dock through the interventions that have been made, particularly creating habitats for wildlife and also creating a new floating forest. The planting for the scheme features native vegetation. In addition, beneath the floating structures, actually we've been working with ecologists to create fish refuges, which are actually hung beneath the islands, and these create spawning grounds, while bird boxes are hung in amongst the trees to create wild nesting sites for a range of garden bird species. The project also includes an artificial reef, which is sunk beneath the floating platform. So what you see when you go onto the structures is only part of the story. So what you've got beneath these floating structures are cobbles, bivalve shelves, shingle for ballast, and 4 hanging coral shellfish habitats. So planting has also been selected to reduce the urban heat island effect. So because of these interventions, we've already established that it will be up to 15% cooler because of the interventions. That's the shading and the evaporative cooling provided by the Eden Dock. What's been really fascinating about Eden Dock is the first project that I've worked on where when the ribbon is cut, everybody, the public, have got access to a new piece of public space which is floating on the water. And people were just watching it and using their phones to record it as this new experience of Canary Wharf. People were walking around it, and I think people have been playing with it a bit. So there were some evergreen people, which are sculptures which were added to begin with, and I believe that there is a crocodile which has been located and moves around the site. But there are lots of real animals as well which are enjoying and moving to the dock, because the thing is, not many people know this, but Canary Wharf in this part of London is pretty sterile in terms of ecology. So these interventions, they're not just decorative, they nurture and they support wildlife which is already starting to move into the dock. The next step for Canary Wharf is not to be a business district, is to extend way beyond that and to become a thriving, diverse neighbourhood which connects to the communities to the North Poplar and to the Isle of Dogs to the south. And part of that is to welcome those communities to participate. The Eden Dock is a gift. And what we've noticed is that the office workers are really positive. There's been a huge amount of enthusiasm about working next to Eden Dock. But also there are opportunities that are being explored by Canary Wharf as we designed it. So Eden Dock can also be used to showcase exhibitions on the water, open air concerts, as well as just sit out and enjoy this southwest facing orientation, which is a great location. So sitting out in the summer and just enjoying the weather, but also there's a programme of performances and activities which will follow.
My thanks to Glenn Howes there. And it's just a few stops on the Underground now to our final project on the edge of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. Keen observers who've visited recently will have noticed some big buildings with equally big names popping up. Signs reading V&A, the world's largest museum of arts and design, or Sadler's Wells, the renowned performing arts venue, mark just two of the blockbuster tenants who've moved into spaces in this new culture and innovation quarter. This grand project is called East Bank, and I'm delighted to say that the director of East Bank, Tamsin Ace, joined me for an interview last week. I began by asking her to give a bit of background on what's been going on over the past decade on the banks of Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park.
The ambition for the Olympic Games and the reason why it was decided that the Olympic and Paralympic Games would happen in East London was to think about how that would drive socioeconomic growth to that part of the city and to really think about what the long-term benefits would be to the communities of East London. And so a big part of that was thinking about housing. But when the Games happened in 2012, there was a real sort of push to think about what the cultural and education offer could be there. So culture, education and innovation were always part of the legacy. But in terms of what that legacy would look like in terms of the cultural and education institutions, that really grew out of the success of the Games and the sense of optimism and pride and hope that the Games brought to London and the entire UK.
And tell me, what is East Bank? Is East Bank a developer? Is it the owner of the land? What's your role?
So as director of East Bank, my role is to bring these amazing institutions together to really think about what it would mean to be more than good neighbours. So the East Bank partners have chosen to make homes in East London. They've chosen to come together because they see real benefit and value in thinking about what it would be to be next door to the V&A and what the BBC could do if they had London College of Fashion and Sadler's Wells as their neighbours, and what would it mean to build programmes collaboratively, to share resource, to really embed themselves in the communities of East London, to think about what these big institutions could do differently, how East Bank offers them a bit of a clean slate to sort of think about the museums, the universities and the arts centres of the future that really do welcome everyone into their spaces.
We're talking to you on the day when Sadler's Wells is going to open its operation. It's one of our premier dance institutions and has an amazing theatre in Islington in London, has incubated so much talent. What's the benefit for them? I think you've hinted at a little bit about moving east. Is it more space, or is it really this idea that maybe it's easier to break down the walls a little bit when you come to a new place? And as you said, it's a part of London, many successful people there, but many challenges as well.
It's a combination of all those things you've just referenced. Sadler's Wells were always wanting to think about what a new home could look like with a mid-scale, dedicated, purpose-built dance venue. So what they've got at Sadler's Wells East is a 550-seat purpose-built auditorium with flexible seating. What they've got there is a stage, but they've also got huge dance studios, and they've got a chance to implement the Rose Choreographic School and also to set up a hip-hop academy. So they'll also have Academy Breaking Convention, which will be a training programme for 16 to 19-year-olds. So what the new space offers them is a chance to really grow their programme, to be a home for international mid-scale touring, but also to really be embedded in this sort of energetic and diverse boroughs of East London. All the East Bank partners are so committed to seeing what they can learn from the communities they want to be part of, and also to think about a new way of programming and working, but also connecting in with the other East Bank partners as part of the programme.
We came out the other day to see part of one project which is connected to the V&A, the Storehouse. We had some interesting conversations there, but what struck me was everybody was so excited about the idea of democratising access to culture and to education that every attempt is being made to say culture is less defined than you think, and culture is for everybody, and it's your culture that should come in through the front door. And are you hoping all those things become a simple way of bringing people in through the front door?
I do, yes. I mean, it's really important that East Bank as a collective don't just arrive and land on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in East London and expect audiences to engage and visit their buildings. They've been working in East London for the last 10 years. building programmes that really mean something, listening to the experts that have been in East London a lot longer than we have to understand what a programme might look like that would attract different audiences to their venues. The spaces have also been designed and built to be as welcoming and as open as possible. If you come to UCL East or London College of Fashion, and now Sadler's Wells East is the three that are currently open, they have huge, open, welcoming spaces. Even with Sadler's Wells East, they've got big neon signs on the front and back of their building that state, "You are welcome." They have a community dance floor right in the front corner of their building. So already what they're doing is creating spaces that don't feel like a barrier. They feel like a place that you can walk into, that you can stumble across, that you belong to. But the programmes that will be in those buildings have also been made hand in hand with the very communities that we want to bring to East Bank, but also for that vision and that energy to sort of live and exist beyond the physical structures of East Bank as well.
There's something about being in the proximity of culture, even if you don't dip into it, that's also revitalising. And there's lots of good public realm there. There's lots of spaces, where maybe you're a student and you don't have time to go into Sadler's Wells at lunchtime, but you can go and sit in a new piece of public space. Everything seems to be properly plugged in to make a kind of a new community there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the Olympic Park itself is a 560-acre site. It's got beautiful green space, really open places to sit and hang out. And already with the sporting venues, like the Aquatic Centre, for example, there are people that come there every day, whether it's with your school to swim or with your family. So people already see the space as a place for them to engage with and hang out in. But East Bank has been designed with an additional public realm as well that will have free outdoor programming, seating space. And we saw the minute that the students arrived on the park, the sort of energy that shifted when they arrived. When you got sort of 4,000 fashion students sort of coming from Stratford Station, walking through Westfield onto the park, sort of disrupting and activating those public spaces, you can see the potential and the possibilities. And that's been a big part of the design of East Bank. But also thinking about how what's happening in those buildings spills out into the public realm as well. We don't want that content to be behind closed doors. So, London College of Fashion have got a very visible gallery right at the front because they've got 13 floors and they've got some of the most exciting researchers and future designers reimagining what the world could look like. And we want those ideas and that content to be spilling out so that people can bump into it when they arrive in the park. And to sort of build that muscle memory that if you choose to go to the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park and to East Bank, you're going to bump into creativity and ideas and be surprised and be welcome, but know that you can learn something new, I guess. And that's been the sort of the vision and the ethos that we're working to.
How much of your job is going to be actually changing people's maps of London to think, I need to go east? Because London is so huge now and we've been so successful at pushing culture and education and development to every part of the city. Is part of your job that kind of epic piece of narrative storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of my job is that storytelling and connecting the dots. So as director for East Bank, which is such an exciting role, but I would say not an easy one because I'm working between 5 big institutions, working with 4 local authorities and the GLA and central government to really weave together and knit together why it's important to invest in culture and education in this way. When I think about London now and having based myself on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park for the last 18 months, Stratford is so well connected. There are 10 railway lines. I think people are becoming really surprised at how easy it is to travel and get there. And it is a gift for me that these 5 institutions have chosen to come together. They know the value of what it would mean to work together, and that will come through within the programming. So you've got the V&A East Museum coming to the East Bank partners and going, this is our big idea for our opening exhibition in 2026. Do you want to get in on it? And you've got 4 other partners going, well, of course, that's a gift. We could tell that story from this perspective. Or what if we did that? What would that look like? So again, from a visitor experience, you can come to East Bank to hear about one big idea, but then go from building to building, site to site to explore it from those multiple perspectives. And I don't think there's anywhere else in London where you can get that 360 experience of a big idea. That sort of generosity of, we know that we could be stronger together. We know that by breaking down those barriers and sort of pooling our resource and our ideas and working hand in hand with our communities could tell a very different story. So I think that's what's going to draw audiences.
It's amazing because I think making cultural quarters sounds quite easy, but you go to some around the world and they can often be a little bit sterile. You don't quite understand how the institutions work together. But you're talking about that actually this collusion and colliding and joining up of institutions has such impact. You mentioned 2026, but how long before all of the institutions are up and running? What's the vision bit for you?
Well, 2025 is a big year for us because obviously we have Sadler's Wells East opening today on the 6th of February. And then we have V&A East Storehouse opening in May. And again, that's another extraordinary space with 250,000 objects and 1,000 archives that are fully accessible. You can walk within the storehouse and see everything asleep in their sort of pockets, and you can draw anything out. And then the David Bowie Centre, which is a dedicated resource to 90,000 David Bowie-related objects, will open in September of 2025. And then in 2026, we have V&A East Museum opening, and then we have the BBC Music Studios sort of end of 26, early 2027. So the next 2 years, the momentum is really building. But in terms of programme and ambition, the partners are here already. They've been working in East London already. We're building collaborations and programmes. So the BBC might not physically be in their building until 2026, but already they're part of the conversations, bringing BBC singers, working with local schools, having DJs at events, and really thinking about how we can complement and build on each other's ideas and programme. And that, to me, is the most exciting part of East Bank, is that willingness and openness to collaborate.
My thanks there to Tamsin Ace. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. Remember that you can get new editions of the show every week. Just follow us through your favourite podcast provider. This episode of The Urbanist was produced by Carlotta Rebello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.